Hey, welcome to this live stream. As always, if you're part of the replay crew, let us know where you're coming from, and we're going to geek out about the circle of thirds. So a lot of times around here, we talk about the circle of fifths, which is a super powerful tool for chord progressions, for coming up with cool chord progressions, borrowed chords, chord substitutions, all of that good stuff, secondary dominance, all of that. But there's this lesser known pattern called the circle of thirds that we're going to get into. And so let's dive in, because there's a lot to cover here. There's a lot of advantages to the circle of thirds, some insights that it provides. And so let's look at what some of those are. But first, I have to say that if you do like a Google search for circle of thirds, you're going to see, much of the time, you're going to see a depiction of the circle of thirds, which is not ideal. And by that, I mean, it can really mess you up if you don't get your hands around what the pattern really is and how to use it. So let's look at a typical depiction of the circle of thirds. And it goes something like this. And we're going to explain how this pattern came to be. But we have, let's say, for example, C, and then we have E, and then G, and B, and D, F, and A. That's how you'll sometimes see it. And the reason it's called a circle of thirds is because all of these notes are spaced at intervals, tertian intervals, or intervals of major thirds and minor thirds. So from C to E is a major third, from E to G is a minor third, G to B, D, F, and A, they're all thirds. And because this part's pretty obvious, because it forms a circle, it's a circle of thirds. And it seems like that's straightforward enough. Makes sense, circle of thirds. But there's a problem. There are a few problems. We're going to walk through why this depiction is not ideal and a better way to look at this pattern and really be able to use it. So let's look at what I mean. And this is what we're going to use as the circle of thirds. And right away, you might be like, okay, well, it's a little different than what we just looked at. It's going in the opposite direction for one. So instead of in a clockwise direction, it's C to E, E to G, G to B, and so on in a counterclockwise direction. And also it looks like a lump rather than a circle. Like that's less of a smooth, round shape. So why would you call that a circle? Really, it's a loop. So it's like the loop of thirds. And even then, it might not be super straightforward why we're even talking about this pattern, what it means, what's the use, and what we can do with it. So let's look even further. And let's start with the G major scale. Well, we're in the key of C, but we're going to jump into the key of G, right? So we have here the G major scale. Well, let's pull this up instead. Okay, so we have the G major scale, which is G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, right? So that's just 8 notes of that scale. And if you combine every other note, you get, the G major chord starting on the first scale degree. Start on the second scale degree, and you get a minor A minor chord. Start on the third scale degree, and you get a B minor chord, and so on. And so you can just go up the line like this and play different chords that are based on that underlying scale. And that's fine. But the cool thing about the circle of thirds is it's taking that every other pattern and building harmonic relationships that inform chord progressions from there. So let's look at this and see how we come about with this loop, this lump of thirds, or this loop of thirds that is actually a better depiction than the first one we looked at. And why is that? So we have the circle of the major scale, And every other pattern, we have a major third is a dark line, a minor third is a light line, major third is a dark line, minor third is a light line, and so on. And if you take those patterns, so we have G major is made from a major third followed by a minor third. B minor is a minor third followed by a major third. D major is a major third followed by a minor third, and so on. If we take all of those chords and then we consolidate them into a stack, so we just squeeze them into a stack, then we get this line, and it's still thirds. So we have a major third and a minor third and a major third and a minor third and a minor third, and you go all the way from G to G, and you make your way to G again, and you could repeat the pattern. So we could continue on in that direction. Now, instead of just making it linear, like on a keyboard, it's helpful to wrap it into a loop because it's cyclical and infinite. And when we do that, by going in a counterclockwise direction, because we start out to the right, we got a major third, and then, oh, you know what? It loops back onto itself. And so that's why we have this counterclockwise formation, which is interesting. And this is why we have that kind of lumpy shape. Instead of a perfectly round circle, it's because it's like almost like you had, connector pieces that could only bend and can only reach so far. So a major third can reach farther than a minor third, and a minor third, can only reach so far, and then a major third gets it up that high. So we have this counterclockwise formation due to the actual sequence of notes, starting with the tonic here, the one, in this case, G at the bottom, and then it loops back onto itself in this counterclockwise direction. And that slightly asymmetrical, non-perfectly round shape is due to the actual intervals of major thirds and minor thirds. So if we go back to our first diagram, where we just show it as a perfect circle, we lose that really important information of, wait, that's a major third, that's a minor third, that's a major third, that's a minor third, like, because they're equidistant in the circle. And it's like, what's the point of, other than, yeah, okay, you know from the letter that that's a major third just from previous study, but you lose the nuance and the actual point of even depicting thirds in the first place, which is losing the interval information. So we have the interval information baked into this pattern of the circle of thirds. Now, we don't have to keep these dark lines for major thirds and the light lines for minor thirds all the time, but that helps show from a structural standpoint how it was formed in the first place. Then an additional benefit of, so we're going to talk through the benefits of showing it like this, showing it in this format. And the first one is that it shows you the intervals. Like I say, the distance between the root notes of each chord actually illustrate the underlying intervals. And since music is patterns based on intervals, that's really important information. The next thing is that this orientation also helps in understanding harmonic relationships and the kind of musical gravity that connects these notes. And by that, I mean, and this is an illustration from the course in, I think it's lesson 7, but talking about how as you move around the different, like a pinball machine, move around the different chords, the tonic, or in this case, the major key of G, is kind of like that gravitational home base. So as you strike out in different progressions and make your way, it eventually, like a pinball, is going to want to settle back down to that tonic. And so that's helpful. Rather than showing the circle of thirds with the tonic up here, it's, oh, sorry, I thought I was showing this. So let me just make sure that I cover what I just talked about. So as you strike out into harmonic space with the tonic down here like this, it's like a pinball machine. So this illustration is from lesson 7. And as you settle back in, just like the pinball, can bounce around and make its way and then eventually come back down to the gravity of, actual gravity, the musical gravity of the tonic, eventually the chord progression is going to resolve to that tonic. And so instead of showing the circle of thirds like this with the tonic at the top, where the chord progression defies gravity to eventually make its way back to the ceiling, that's counterintuitive. And so by having the tonic, in this case G, in the key of G major at the bottom, helps to orient you within harmonic space. So that's another miss for this perfectly circular formation with the tonic at the top, and having this amorphous but actually accurate depiction of the circle of thirds with the tonic at the bottom is more intuitive. And it's like just little things like, okay, how do I resolve up? Like, that's just it. What goes up must come down. And so to depict music in ways that kinesthetically we understand is really important. And it's little things like that it's like, it's counterintuitive, and there's this hang up in your mind if you're like, okay, yeah, the tonic is, I'm going to resolve up. It's just odd. So that is a benefit, is the orientation. And then another benefit of showing the circle of thirds in this way, where you have the chords depicted in this arrangement, is that we've been looking at, the circle of thirds as just from one note to the next, you have this formation of thirds. But what's important is that there are other connections, not just neighbors within the circle of thirds. You can dive in deeper and see really cool connections between the chords, like this inner ring of consonant chords, the 1, 4, 5, the 1, the 4, and the 5, in this case, G major, C major, and D major, are all closely related because of their relationship in the circle of thirds. They're neighbors in the circle of thirds, in the circle of fifths. So in the circle of fifths, in the key of G, if we come to G, for example, and we have G major, C major, and D major, or 1, 4, and 5, they're neighbors in the circle of fifths. And you can see from their colors, red, orange is nestled between red and orange. So in the circle of thirds, even though they're not adjacent in the circle of thirds, meaning, G isn't right next to, C on one side and D on the other, they are part of this consonant inner ring, which is really important. So, G, C, D, and G. So just cycling between those three chords within the circle of thirds, you can come up with all sorts of progressions. We've played 1, 4, 5 progressions here, like the 12-bar blues, Hound Dog, Blue Suede Shoes. All sorts of songs are based on those three chords. And with this depiction, it's easier to see that, yep, sure enough, there's this consonant inner ring of major chords. Likewise, there is this outer ring of more dissonant chords, or less consonant chords. So you have the minor chords and the diminished chords that are out in this further orbit of harmonic space. So you've got A minor, E minor, B minor, and F sharp diminished in this outer ring. And so, if you were to, again, show the circle of thirds in its traditional depiction, so with, say, G, and then B, and D, and F sharp diminished, and then we have A, C, and E, you could kind of suss out, you're like, okay, there's this, it's not really an inner ring, and then you have this, it's not really an outer ring. You have to force your eyes to see it. And with the equidistances, I didn't do a great job with my diagram here, but you do start to see inappropriate relationships. And I mean that in a musical sense. So you have you start to think, oh, that's a triangle. Oh, maybe there's this perfect triangle between these chords. And it's like, no. The actual geometry of music, there isn't a triangle between 1, 4, and 5. But this depiction of the circle of thirds, pardon me, would have you think that maybe there is a geometry and, oh, maybe there's a triangle between these chords. And it's like, no, no, no. It's just because it's a bad depiction of the circle of thirds, when really you're not going to get tripped up like that with the actual depiction of these chords. So that's another benefit of this layout of the circle of thirds. And with this circle of thirds, you can move around and see, okay, so we have this inner ring of consonants. So the 1, 4, 5 is within this inner ring. And so you can see how the 1, 4, 5 is part of, it's just playing within that very safe consonant ring of major chords. So again, we could play G major, 4 to C major, 5 to D major, and we could just totally avoid this outer ring out here of minor chords and diminished chords and just stay within this super safe zone of consonants. And you can't go wrong. Like, that chord progression is going to sound good. And it sounds especially happy because those major chords are more bright and uplifting. They have more of a stable sound, hence the smiley face in this diagram. But if you did want to, venture out into harmonic territory that has a little more of this melancholy vibe of the more dissonant outer ring, you can get a progression like, G, E minor, A minor, D to G. So instead of just going straight to that 4 in the consonant inner ring, we went to this minor chord in the dissonant outer ring of E minor. We stayed in the dissonant outer ring to A minor, and then up to D major. So we're back into the consonant inner ring and then back to G. So you can already tell when you go to that E minor. So we start with this, happy sounding major chord. It's like, oh, okay, I'm getting more reflective. That minor chord definitely throws it in a different kind of direction. And it's because it's in that dissonant outer ring. And then, oh, we're still kind of more in the reflective, semi-sad mode. And then, okay, that major chord brings us back to the tonic. So that's another benefit of playing with the circle of thirds like this. With the circle of thirds in its traditional, and when I say traditional, it's just common kind of less thought out depiction, where it's a perfect circle with the tonic at the top. It's not as easy to see these progressions. It's kind of focusing on just that perimeter, just the adjacent chords, and not the harmonic relationships between the various chords. So let's just play one more progression that's kind of neutral, where it's got, a couple of minor chords, but it's got a lot of major chords here in the middle. So the major chords kind of balance out the minor chords to come up with more of a neutral sound based on, again, those emotional qualities of major versus minor chords. So, G, A minor, E minor, C, G, A minor. So it's kind of like, okay, I mean, it's not the most amazing progression. Certainly, you could probably come up with a really good melody that follows that flow. And really, it's just kind of an ascending pattern. I could keep playing all of the chords in sequence and play the chords of the key of G, but you can see how, okay, by moving between the consonant inner ring and the more dissonant outer ring, you can get some, varying types of harmonic movement. So that's another benefit of this depiction of the circle of thirds. Again, not as a perfect circle. It's taking the circle of the circle of thirds too literally and not basing it on its underlying framework, its actual structure of thirds, which is really the point. The thirds should override the circle in terms of how it's depicted. And then another interesting relationship here is you can see cool connections between like the 1, 4, and 5, which is if you take the chords or the notes within the G major chord. So we have G to B to D makes a G major chord. So that's the 1 shown by this big Roman numeral down here. and we take the 3 notes of D major, or the major 5 chord, so D, F sharp, and A, and that is the 5 chord. So Roman numeral 5 up here in the upper right. And then we take C, E, and G, which are the 3 notes that make up the C major chord. So C, E, and G. And then D, F sharp, and A is the 5 chord. Just together, the 3 chords of 1, 4. Oh, let me go the other way. 1, 4, and 5 encompass all of the notes within the key. And so that's partly why the 1, 4, and 5 is especially powerful, is because it covers the bases harmonically within the key. And with this lumpy, I call it lumpy because it's not a perfect circle, but it is perfect in the way that it actually depicts the chords, which is the actual circle of thirds. And in this way, you can see really cool overlap. It's like a Venn diagram where the 3 chords all overlap to form this cool harmonic space, which is like a beautiful thing. So the circle of thirds is super powerful, and we've talked about how this actual formation, instead of just a perfect circle of thirds, shows you the intervals more directly, and the intervals are why it's even a thing in the first place, because those thirds, relationships of tertian, major thirds, and minor thirds are important. And because the orientation, having the tonic, in this case G, at the bottom, like a pinball machine, helps to orient you within harmonic space. So when you resolve to that tonic, making your way, in different chord progressions, resolving down to the tonic by its gravitational pull is more intuitive. So you're not getting tripped up or just like, there's something wrong about resolving to the ceiling. What goes down must fall up. Like, that's not a thing. So using our own experience as humans to crack the code of music theory and not put little tripping blocks in our way that are unintentional but really throw you off. And then another benefit of this pattern is the connections, that it actually shows the connections, like I say, between the consonant inner ring. Let's get a cleaner diagram. I've kind of marked that one up. You have the consonant inner ring and the more dissonant outer ring. So you can start to play with chord progressions and understand what's going on, is the harmonic movement between consonants and dissonance, which is what makes music flow as it does to our ears. You can see it with your eyes and reinforce it with your ears, and combined, you're using both your senses. There's not a huge benefit of depicting it visually in a way that ultimately is confusing. So if you're gonna visualize it, which is music theory by definition, to see sound, then you really want to see it and have it be a clean, insightful representation rather than a confusing one. And then another benefit of this is if you have all of these, if you have the circle of thirds as a perfect circle, then it precludes you from this last insight, which I'm going to show, which is seeing the connections between these circles of thirds in multiple keys. So by virtue of the fact that the major thirds, so the major third is this thick black line, the minor third is this lighter line. The fact that it is kind of flatter on the bottom it's not by design, because it's just nature, it's a natural pattern, but it allows for this connection to see the links between different circles of thirds in the different keys. So at the center here, we have major scales that overlap to form a daisy chain pattern of scales, also known as the circle of fifths. And above each key, we have a circle of third, like for the key of C, and we have a circle of thirds for the key of G, and a circle of thirds for the key of D, and so on. And you can see how they connect, like C's major third, E, is, well, my lines are a little too thick because I'm blocking what I'm trying to show, which is, So C's major third, whoop, that's not what I meant to do. Hold on, let me get a thinner line. Okay, so C's major third is E, just like G's minor sixth, or just sixth chord, is E minor as well. So you can see how in the key of C, you go C, E, and G, make a G major chord, and E, G, and B make an E minor chord. Well, in the key of G, E, G, and B make a minor chord, so it's down here. So E minor is the 6 in the key of G, it's the 3 in the key of C, and by seeing these overlaps, the connections between different keys, you can start to get more insight into like modal mixture and movement between keys, like parallel modes and all of that, which if you had just a circle, like if each one of these was a perfect circle, so that's the key of C, and then you have like the key of G and the key of D, there wouldn't be this connection to see that overlap, because the fixation on depicting it as a perfect circle actually misses the ability to show the actual natural overlaps between these amorphous circles of thirds that are the actual shape of the circle of thirds. If that makes sense. It's there are so many patterns that I'm talking about here that really we could just dive into this alone, and maybe we should do that. Just kind of dive into that in a video and just focus on one depiction at a time. But this is kind of an overview of what the circle of thirds really is, and how a depiction showing it as a perfect circle, while that's nice, it's actually problematic, frankly, and will trip you up if you just try to show it as a circle, as a perfect circle, because it's not really what it is. So that's the circle of thirds, what you really need to know in a nutshell. And maybe we can just jump into some of the comments here and geek out together about some of these facts of music theory. Songs for a Winter Snowfall. Very cool name, by the way. Thanks for being here. And let's see. So you said this is cool. That's cool. This also shows how the E is the median, yes, for both C and G, standard median for C and submedian for G. Yeah, well said. So the median, like in the terminology of music, exactly. So it's this link. It's like E is labeled, E minor, I should say, is labeled by both a minor third and a minor sixth in this case, because it serves roles in both keys. Now, in the circle of fifths, we'll just kind of talk about the circle of fifths for a second. In the key of G, E minor is the 6. Okay, so and it's the relative chord. The 6 is the relative minor of its given tonic. Now, or its relative major chord. Now, if we rotate into the key of C, those chords are still there. G major is connected to E minor, but when C is 1, now E minor is the 3. So this is just another way of looking at it, and actually, ultimately, the circle of fifths is an even more compact and elegant way of seeing all these relationships. And in lesson 19, which I did just finish writing, and I'm about to finish the illustrations for lesson 19 in the course, so more on that to come. But yeah, the circle of fifths shows these same relationships, which is beautiful because music is fractal. Like what we see at the circle of thirds level, those same patterns show up in the circle of fifths. It's just kind of a different depiction. But yeah, these connections are wonderful. And exactly, it's like the link. It's not the missing link because it's not missing. It's right there. But it is the link between those keys. Songs for Winter Snowfall. You said, my favorite acronym for stacked thirds is every good band deserves fans and cash. I love it. Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Let's speak to that acronym here, because, and I was thinking about talking about this in this one, but we'll dive into this more in an upcoming stream here. But if we look at this diagram, so you have like every good band deserves fans and cash. So that, when you look at the staff lines and spaces of traditional notation, it's a mnemonic to remember the spacing between, like, okay, like in the treble staff, like I say, we'll dive into this in way more detail, but you have, in the treble staff, you have every good boy or every good band deserves fans. And then also down here, you have fans and cash every. So you have this every good boy does fine, or every good band deserves fans, and then face or fans and cash every. So you have this this interesting pattern, which is showing up in another way here. So this is the medieval man-made esoteric depiction of these patterns. This is nature's actual pattern. This is the actual geometry of music in the circle of thirds. And there is a connection between these two. And we'll talk about that more in another one. But yeah, that's probably the best. Every good boy deserves favor or does fine is not as interesting as bands with fans and cash. I love it. Cool. I'm glad these visuals help. Being able to see these patterns from different perspectives is definitely helpful. I found in my experience to, like I say, seeing it in traditional notation, this one definitely takes more of an explanation because, again, it's man-made. There's a lot of rules and symbols involved, whereas this is naturally formed. And so that's the beautiful thing about music theory, is that it's all patterns. And so seeing it from the patterns perspective is a shortcut to understanding. Sam Stamos, it's cool to have you on. So every good boy deserves fudge and chocolate. Man, that's what I go to when I've been well behaved throughout the day. I'm like, where's my fudge and where's my chocolate? I like it. Every good boy deserves fudge and chocolate. I love it. So WMB Venn Dam. Thank you for being here. And I love that there is an actual clear structure to follow. This is my first time understanding it as a new musician. Very cool. I love to hear that. When I first got into music theory, wanting to kind of understand music theory, I took piano lessons. I was like way older than the typical demographic. It was like, girls with ribbons in their hair, leaving the lesson before I got there as a later teen. And, they had just performed hot cross buns and, it was amazing. It sounded amazing. And I sat down with my long hair and I was like, I want to learn about chords. And my instructor said, yeah, I can teach you chords. And I was like, can we do it without music notation? Because I just really want to learn the patterns. I didn't understand music theory, but I knew it was patterns. So I just wanted to cut to the chase. She was like, oh yeah, we can do that. But it turns out that she was totally like hell-bent on traditional notation. She's like, this is the way to do it. And I was like, I'd really, really like to not do that. And so once I struck out on my own and just kind of like dove into hundreds and hundreds of books and researching obsessively about music theory, coming to find that it's actually just patterns. Damn, it's right. They are just patterns. And it's beautiful since it is intuitive. Music are natural patterns, and these natural patterns, like things in nature, form these beautiful fractal geometric patterns that are beautiful. So anyway, I rhapsodize a bit too much, but thank you for being here, and I'm glad it makes sense. Smooth Keys 793, thanks for being here. So hey, dude, even though I don't read music, but I can hear music, and then that way I can play along. So yeah. This one, like I'm leaving it on the screen, even though I really don't want to, showing the traditional notation because, and I'm definitely going to be doing more videos about this. So much of my focus in the last few months has been on finishing the course, part 5 of the course. So lessons 16 through 20. I just finished pretty much, I'm close to finishing lesson 19. So almost being done with the course and getting that out. And so I've scaled back on like produced videos, doing shorts, doing, all the usual stuff that I'd been doing. And so there's a definite backlog of content that I want to cover. And one of them is just diving into traditional notation and the problems with it. There are some benefits, so I don't mean to poo-poo it completely, but you don't need to know notation to understand music theory. And in fact, it's better to understand music theory first, and then, if you want, take on traditional notation. And that is mind-blowing. It certainly was for me to begin with, because I thought they were one and the same. Everyone presents notation as music theory, and they are not the same. Good evening, my good man. How are you doing on this fine Monday evening? You know what? I am doing well. I'm doing fantastically well, to quote Andre 3000, and I hope you're doing well as well. It is starting to be springtime where I am. And yesterday I was outside and I literally had the thought in my mind, I feel alive like I haven't in a while. So there's the answer. Hope you're doing great too. Songs for winter snowfall. I love the simplicity of how stacking thirds is as simple as leapfrogging every other interval in the scale. Yes, and that's like so well said. That's like a perfect description. So let's take the key of C, for example. So we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And if we just do every other note, so we have 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. And the reason that we call this, so it's 1, 3, 5, 7, because we're within the simple intervals of an octave. So we haven't crossed the threshold of the octave yet. So we're 1, 3, 5, 7. And then once we cross that octave, we get into what are called compound intervals, which just means they're higher than the octave. And so 9, 11, and 13. So 9 is the same as a 2, 11 is the same as a 4, and 13 is the same as a 6. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. And kind of sounds jazzy, right? Because jazz starts to incorporate extended chords, and we'll get into that on another video where the circle of thirds is a great use of the circle of thirds, that is understanding extended chords. That's really where they come from. So Donidri, hey, it's cool to see you on. So Venn diagram, really great way to show the 1, 4, 5 covers all of the notes in a key. Yeah, that is, so the 1, 4, and 5. So in the key of C, for example, 1, 4, 5, and 1, or 1, 4, 5, or sorry, 1, 4, 5, and 1 in the key of C. Yeah, if you slow down, and that's one of the things about traditional notation that is problematic, is that it, out of the gate, it forces you to think in terms of time, because it's showing rhythm and pitch. And so you can't just think about pitch on its own. You're forced to think, oh, I have to think fast. The rhythm, I'm already thinking about rhythm. But if you divorce time from space, or rhythm from pitch, you can really get into the relationships of, I'm not having to play the song in a meter along measures. I'm just like looking at the chords. Yep, we've got those 3 notes. And then we have those 3 notes, those 3 notes. And together they cover all of the notes in a key. DL, let's see. Sorry, I'm jumping into your question. So it used to boggle my mind how many country songs are just GCD. Now it makes sense as an actual utility for regular people without any education. So well said. Exactly. In fact, part of the reason that the key of G in particular is especially common is because those open chords of, let's see, let me get the angle right. I'm like all disoriented. So you have G, C, D, and G. So it might be that G is especially conducive to the average vocal chord range. And in lesson 18, we get into chord inversions and all of that to really expand into the entire fretboard. But just the fact that G, C, and D are easy to play, that's partly why the key of G is so common. And then also the relationship between G, C, and D in the circle of thirds further explains why those chords in particular are so common, why the 1, 4, and 5 are ubiquitous, because they're foundational to music. Thank you, Trader Joe, for being here. I love your name. I also love Trader Joe's. If you haven't had crunchy curls from Trader Joe's, definitely check those out. But yeah, I'm glad this is helpful. And the circle of thirds is a really beautiful thing. Sam Stamos, fascinating, very cool. Yeah, circle of thirds is lesser known than, say, the circle of fifths. And a lot of times we talk about the circle of fifths. And in lesson 19, I dive into both the circle of fifths and the circle of thirds in a lot of detail. 19 isn't out quite yet. I'll definitely be talking about it as it gets out. But being able to kind of like navigate both and see musical patterns from both perspectives is really helpful, so that you're not a one-trick pony in your mind, the universal you, so that you're not just, because like if you were to look at a scene, like if you were to, is it Kurosaki? There's like a really great Japanese filmmaker who he did a really cool film about like he replayed the story like 3 times, but it was from each character's perspective. So you see it from character A's perspective, it goes through the story, and then the film starts. It's like an early, it was kind of like an early Pulp Fiction where it was like messing with time, and then he showed the same storyline from character B's perspective, and it was like it was like a different story because they had a different perspective. And then I think he did it a 3rd time with the character C. But really interesting film, and it is interesting to see these musical patterns from different perspectives, seeing it in the circle of thirds, seeing it in the circle of fifths, seeing it on a keyboard or on a fretboard, and from all of these different angles, you come up with more vantage points. It is music theory to see sound on steroids, because you're seeing it like a 360, like an actual view. So you really are just wrapping your head and your arms and your mind around these patterns. Very cool. So yeah, this is the circle of thirds, MWB Van Dam. I wanted to learn music theory as I am learning to play piano. I learn just about anything faster when I truly understand the meaning and structure behind it for some reason. Your vids help me a lot. Very cool. I'm glad they're helpful. And yeah, totally understanding, knowing the why behind something is just makes the how just so much easier and enjoyable. And you're definitely going to go further with an understanding. Smooth Key 793. Hey, dude, would you mind if I can follow you on the Hammond Organ? I think you totally should check out and play the Hammond Organ. That's very cool. Yeah, that's the cool thing about, I have well, it's about stringed instruments. Did a live stream about the relationships between like the guitar, the bass guitar, the ukulele, and different stringed instruments, cello, violin, all that, and how they're just like reflections of the same patterns. And it's the same with the keyboard. Like this is just a linear format of the guitar, which is a rectilinear format, and the Hammond organ is just awesome. So I love it. You should totally do it. So with that, we can wrap it up here with the circle of thirds. Definitely more to talk about, even on we've only scratched the surface, frankly, on these patterns, and there's a lot more that we'll dive into. So thank you for geeking out with me, as always. It's a lot of fun, and we will be talking very soon, and I will see you on the near flip side. We'll see you.